Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. I'm sure it promises to be quite an exciting one this evening on many grounds. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, and good evening to our colleagues on the platform.
Yes, sir. Good to see you again this evening. I will go straight into the questions this evening, sir. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to know your views about the just concluded elections in Nigeria. Um, how do you think that went? Last week, we said we hoped there would be a new president. At some point, we wondered if it was going to happen or not. It's happened. What is your view, sir?
Well, as you rightly said, uh, one of the candidates has been declared the president-elect. The other two candidates have said they will go to court. The observers are split in their reports um, on the elections, with the ECOWAS and African Union giving it a pass mark with certain reservations, those kinds of school reports that all of us are probably used to, where they will say, oh, this student has done well, but he could do better. Um, I don't know how many times I got those kind of remarks from my principal in Igbobi. But then you have the European Union observer saying that the performance falls below expectation. And then you've had congratulatory messages coming in from a lot of the world leaders wishing Nigeria well. And I think that's about all that one could say. It's been a mixed bag of reports. And what one is certain is that this case will go. I mean, the election reports or the election result will go to the Supreme Court. Every presidential election in Nigeria since 1979 had ended up at the Supreme Court, except the Jonathan one of 2015, where Jonathan did not even wait for INEC to declare the report before that congratulatory telephone call to candidate Buhari as he was then. That has been the only exception. And I guess in the present case, there won't be any exception. Looks like it will follow the norm.
So do you recollect any elections in Africa, anywhere, where beyond this stage, the opponents went to court and there was a reversal of the results of the Electoral Commission?
None that I can think of. The first Uhuru Kenyatta's electoral victory, or is it the second one? I can't remember now which one. The Supreme Court threw out the results and ordered new elections. It did not order the opposition to be sworn in. It ordered new elections to be held. And the vituperation that came from Uhuru Kenyatta, which I denounced at that time as being uncalled for and unworthy of a leader who may find himself in the position of being the father of the nation. He poured condemnation and curses on the head of the Supreme Court Chief Justice. He threatened him that they knew his house, his residence, they knew about the movement of his children, and how dare he annul the results and order new elections. So there was a repeat election that was held in Kenya, and Uhuru Kenyatta's party was still declared the winner, and Odinga, the opposition leader, refused to go to court on the rerun of this. That's the only that's the only instance I can think of where the Supreme Court had annulled the report and ordered a rerun, but it didn't order that the opposition should be sworn in.
There's a question direct to me here, sir. I'll put this forward before we move on this topic. This person is saying that with the case now going to court, do you foresee, I think you might have answered this, do you foresee a change in the Nigerian situation?
I cannot predict the outcome in the court. The law, lawyers, judges are so unpredictable. And the law itself, I mean, don't let us hit it on the heads of judges. The law itself is subject to different interpretations. If not, all Supreme Court judgments all over the world will always be unanimous. But as we know, judgments at the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court are never unanimous. They are always split decisions. And that does not impugn the integrity of the judges. It's simply how you see the case. I think in my lecture at the LASU, the Lagos State University, and I think also on this platform at one time, I have pointed out that the way we absorb facts and take an interpretative position on the facts are actually based on factors embedded in each individual one of us. Some of us are liberal-minded, some of us are conservatives. And I mean, I assume you are born a liberal or you are born a conservative, because I mean, I tend to be a liberal, even though that will surprise my wife, who thinks that I'm such a traditionalist, that she thinks I'm conservative. But I tend to think that I'm a liberal. And I would say I was born a liberal. And to that extent, when I interpret issues, I tend to take a liberal point of view. There will be some of my classmates from Igobi College who I could predict are conservative in nature and would take a position on issues based on that conservative nature. So, and it doesn't mean that, you know, either of us is perverse or naive or anything of the sort. That's why the world is so complex. And I must also say that it's not an everlasting position. That's why governments go in, governments go out. At times, somebody will take a conservative position at an election this year. 4 years later, he'll be voting liberal for factors which will have affected his disposition. So I cannot predict the Supreme Court, how the Supreme Court will land on this issue.
One more question, sorry, sir, on this one. I think, again, I'll just try and interpret this question as I say. This particular one is saying that the observers have come in, and as you have rightly highlighted, the observers have, they're in two camps. Some said, okay, some said things to improve. But what this person is saying is, what then exactly is the benefit of the observers if they just come in, they say their views, and nothing happens on the back of the views of the observers?
No, we cannot say nothing happens. The position of the observers can give or deny a legitimacy to something that has happened. And based on their positions could help to stabilize, or it could inflame a position. For example, in the council of each parties, I'm sure what position they would take on the electoral results, one of the factors that they will take into consideration will be the position of the electoral observers. I have served on several observer, teams in Zimbabwe, in Gambia, and where have you, and you could see the nervousness of the political parties before we issue our reports, which we will issue before leaving the country. And in fact, it's interesting that in this particular case, they left the country without meeting the declared winner of the election. Whereas my last posting was when I served on the presidential Commonwealth Observer team in Gambia. And it's rather interesting that all the other observer teams sort of reached out to us on the Commonwealth Observer team that they wanted to harmonize all our positions. So they wanted us to speak first, and then they will know how to position their views. They didn't want to speak out of turn. So that in the case of Gambia, they recognized the Commonwealth as the primary team. It's possible that in another country, it will be the United Nations team that they will recognize as the primary team. So as I was saying, you could see the nervousness of the political parties before we issued our report. And when we then met with the president of Gambia, we were pretty blunt with him. As leader of the team, I was the one supposed to, or I was the one who gave the report, and pointed out to him that in a situation where he was the official candidate of one party, and he was facing 7 other candidates, it made sense that he will win, but that he had diminished the legitimacy of his victory by not giving equal time to the political parties. And I like the answer he gave. He said, Your Excellency, if I speak once and you are saying I should allow the opposition to speak 9 times because there are 9 of them, then in fact, they are being given primacy of the open space, which made a lot of sense. And in our meeting with the opposition parties, we told them so, that you cannot think you will defeat a sitting president by presenting 9 of you. That we hope in the next election, you will get together and sponsor only one candidate. And that's what they did at the next election, and they won that election. Now, it will be presumptuous of me to say that it's because we advised them that they took that advice. But it's also possible that that is why. So the role of the observer teams, while it is not to interfere, it could influence the conduct in the political space of the political parties. It also will influence the position of foreign governments. If all observer teams were condemnatory of the conduct of the election management body, in this case, INEC, if they were condemnatory of it, most foreign governments would be extremely reluctant to be effusive in their congratulatory message to the supposed winner of the election. But like in this case, it was neither here nor there for even those who were uncomfortable with the conduct of the INEC. The foreign governments have then found it safe to issue their congratulatory messages. So really the impact of observer teams is not a useless one. It's actually a positive one.
So let me take the conversation to an issue that came up in Kenya. And when the research team shared this with me, it was an interesting point to put forward to you. And this is the fact that a group of traders decided to protest against Chinese competition in the country and the impact that that was having on trade. Goods were cheaper, things were cheaper coming from China, and the people there chose to take that, and it's impacting local businesses in the area. And it struck me that a lot of African countries and new governments coming in all talk about foreign direct investment, driving investments into the countries and into their economy. But China, we know, has been doing a lot in Africa. What is your take on allowing the kind of investment that comes in and then impacts the local market, which is really what these traders are fighting about in Kenya, but it has wider ramifications across other African nations?
I think that it's perfectly legitimate for governments to protect their domestic markets. All governments do this. You do this through subsidy so that the product of the domestic industries would be cheaper to the consumer, or you do it through imposition of tariffs. Although the World Trade Organization frowns on what it called discriminatory tariff, and you should be careful about them being taken to court by the WTO itself. But there have been several times when the United States have been taken to the tribunal It has lost at the tribunal, and it has just ignored the rulings of the tribunal on the grounds that the primary responsibility of a government is to protect the wealth and the interests of its citizens. So the Kenyan traders were actually were definitely within their rights to protect. And I believe that the Kenya government, depending on its strength vis-a-vis China, should take measures to protect the interest of its traders. And I must say that all governments of the global south should actually pay attention to this, because you say China, given the volume of its trade, which could result in low per capita price of its industrial products, could actually dump these products on the market at cheaper prices. A lot of the textile industries in Nigeria, for example, had been killed by cheaper textile products coming from Asia. Now, this has consequences for employment, for the impact on gross domestic product, the contribution of domestic industrial output in calculating your gross domestic product. All of this, and once they get entrenched, is very, very difficult to uproot them without again creating problems on foreign policy issues between one country and the foreign competitors. It is better to nip it in the bud from the beginning. Some countries had taken the route of having legislation that will protect some sectors from foreign participation. In some countries, it's called the Indigenization Act. In other countries, they've just come right out to block off some areas of their economy from foreign participation. But you will need, if you are going to sustain that, you will need consistent and intensive participation by the host country in the economic sectors, probably through the creation of cooperatives, so that the cooperatives serve as an intermediary. Government will import the goods and get the cooperatives to distribute them at subsidized rates, or the cooperatives themselves will subsidize the price of the industrial output coming in from, which tends to be mini scale, mini in terms of scale, rather than the huge container load of textiles, cotton, or what have you that tends to come from foreign countries. So in summary, the Kenya traders are right, and the Kenya government should not ignore their protest. The Kenya government will be within its rights to learn from what even a country like the countries in the industrial north do to protect their markets from competition by fellow countries in the global north. All of them do it, but they tend to, if you like, cow countries in the global south into simply throwing open their domestic markets to dumping by the industries from the global north.
Thank you, sir. I can see a question here on Zoom, sir. And this person is saying, why are world leaders in a haste to congratulate and not wait until the final determination of the electoral dispute?
They don't have to wait. This happens all the time. You'll recall that, again, if we take just two cases for purposes of illustration. In the case of Kenya, within weeks, the Supreme Court was able to take on the case and dispose of it before the inauguration and swearing in of whoever was declared the winner. In the case of Nigeria, it has been the tradition that it has taken years for the Supreme Court to rule, by which time the defendants will have been sworn in and probably will have served half of his term in office. Instead of both parties being on equal basis of using their own privately generated resources to fight the case, one party is then put at an advantage of using government resources to defend the case before the court, which then means that it is not in any hurry to have the case disposed of. Now, foreign governments can't wait forever, for you to take your time. They have to move on. And I think that each government or governments, foreign governments, have then taken the position that once somebody has been declared and they have had time, 48 hours, to evaluate the reports of the observers, they take their decision and they move on. If it then turns out that the Supreme Court reverses the decision, the declaratory decision of the electoral management body, well, then they will also say, well, they take note of the decision of the Supreme Court, and they hope that everybody will accept decisions of the judicial decisions and then move on.
To what extent, sir, could a foreign government lose face if the Supreme Court were to go against such a ruling? And like in the case of Kenya that you mentioned, had the court ruled that Odinga was the rightful winner of the election, to what extent would that impact the relationship of the countries that had gone ahead and endorsed the candidate that was initially projected as the winner?
No, this is just diplomacy, international relations. Governments take, conflicting positions on issues. There are several issues that governments confront, even in their relationship with one another, that they're not going to use their position on election. So it will be a foolish government that will say, because you had congratulated the opposition, therefore, I'm going to have a hostile relationship with you. It will be a foolish government that will do so. But please, I don't want us to use the whole of this time on Nigerian elections. There are so many other issues. I hope I plead that we move on.
Oh, okay, sir. Okay, so I was going to take you straight to the issue of France and Africa, because I think a few sessions ago, maybe even last year, you talked about France being a relatively small player without the influence of Africa. And now we seem to be seeing a turnaround from the French government as it relates to Africa. In fact, in one of the opinions out there was that France now needs to show a lot more humility when it comes to her dealings with Africa. Macron is now talking about a new economic strategy, a new military strategy as it regards Africa. What is your view on how France seems to be making a U-turn as it relates to Africa?
We need to be circumspect in evaluating positions of foreign governments, especially when that position looks like, to use your words, a U-turn. I'm cognizant of the contents of the speech made by Macron yesterday, spelling out what will be the new French policy. And he says it will be more of, that the new one will now be more of cooperation with African countries rather than one of domination by France. That's what he said. But I am also cognizant of the declaration by, I believe, was it Chirac or was it Mitterrand? I think it was Chirac. I'm sure Professor Akin Akinyemi will already be getting at his pen to correct me or to confirm my declaration, who said, without the resources, and put that in brackets, without control of African countries, France will just be another third world country in the world, rather than a country that is playing such a prominent role in the world. I don't see France giving up that position of dominance. I see France dressing up its African policy in a more acceptable role, a role that is more attractive, a position that makes it look less neo-colonialist. He says that they are pulling out troops, as they've done in the Sahel, from Burkina Faso, from Mali, etc. And that instead of French bases, there will be cooperative military institutions that will be established for training purposes, with the cooperation of host governments. And I will say, what is the difference between 6 and half a dozen? The same, different appellation. The introduction of an alternative in terms of Russia into the African strategic space obviously has forced or is forcing France to redefine how and not the substance of his role. It's just how to maintain that role, how to ensure that it still continues to control the economic fortunes of the countries with which it has had, a long strategic relationship. There have been questions raised as to why, having run into domestic opposition when Macron talked about reparation in Algeria, he has never repeated it in any of the other former colonies that he has visited. And this is notwithstanding that those countries have respectfully raised the question of reparation. Is because, the right wing in France, that is very powerful, because don't forget that at each election, even when won by the left in France, it has run into having a runoff, and it has never been a landslide. So the right wing has always been there. And at times the right wing wins that election. And so to that extent, that right wing, is still embedded in French colonial memory and French colonial mentality in as far as Africa is. So I don't really see. We will have to wait for the substance of this new African policy. We just have to wait to see. He started, after making that declaration yesterday, he started a four-nation African tour today, starting in Gabon. From Gabon, he will go to Angola. From Angola, he will go to the two Congos. And the report coming from Gabon is that he had run into hostile reception right from the airport, where the Gabonese, the opposition in Gabon are saying, we've had enough of French interference in our domestic affairs, and we want France to leave us alone. So it's touch and go to what extent the new policy declared yesterday will really be reflective in substance rather than just in borrowed ropes.
Mm-hmm. Let me go to Somalia, sir. The United States has announced that they would be increasing military support to Somalia so they can tackle the extremist organizations that they have there. But tons and tons of weapons and ammunition have arrived in Mogadishu. Are you concerned with the amount of military equipment that's going into a nation that's been in conflict for many decades now? Somalia has been more of a conflict zone. What is your reaction to that news of increased weapons going into Somalia?
Well, it's not a question of one being concerned. History, I hope the Americans know the dangers of history repeating itself. The reason why France ran into stiff opposition from its former territories in the Sahel is based primarily on, you've been here for 60 years. You said you are helping us fight the insurgents, the jihadists, and yet no progress has been made. The jihadists have not been defeated. So why are you here? So I hope the United States will keep that at the back of his mind, that the jihadists in Somalia are not going to be pushovers. That's number one. Number two, the United States has not shown an understanding that war leads to casualties, that domestic politics in the United States gets energized once coffins are being brought back home. And that to that extent, the United States must be prepared to take casualties in a war zone that it is involved in. Thirdly, even American domestic opinion is rather hostile when victims or casualties on the other side consists of mostly civilians. And it is in the nature of jihadists' war tactics or guerrilla war tactics, if you want to use them, to be embedded amongst civilians so that counteraction tends to lead to heavy civilian casualties. The guerrillas don't mind that. The jihadists don't mind that. But American public opinion and American, television crews will start to focus on, because the United States will tend to depend more on aerial counter moves and zones being used than actually boots on the ground to engage the jihadists. Now, aerial bombardment and zones tend to lead to heavy civilian casualties. And this war that will then be played out on American domestic television, which again will energize anti-war protests in the United States. And finally, I hope that the Somali government itself will know that America doesn't stay too long in a war situation. And therefore, I hope they will maximize the presence of more American troops and more American weapons in engaging the Somali guerrilla movement, and in securing peace in that area.
Thank you for that, sir. Let me go to, I'll pick this point here, and this is around India's leadership of the G20 and the meeting that's gone on with India trying to position herself as a voice for the global South and trying to make sure that some of these challenges are championed within the G20. Number one, how do you think India would perform and is performing in that role of the president of the G20? And secondly, if we look at the backdrop of the war in the Russia-Ukrainian war, and to what extent would this G20 meeting help in pushing for peace there?
Well, I think first of all, to clarify the role of India, the presidency of the G20 is a rotative one. So this year is the turn of India to preside. Next year, it will move on to somebody, to another country. And so countries tend to use that its annual presidential status to seek to make an impression worldwide. Unlike Bali last year, where the G20 conference seemed to have brought together some softening of the relationship between Russia and the United States, sufficiently that they were able to come up with a consensual communique at the end of the meeting. The one in India, in fact, seems to have hardened positions so that they could not even come up with a communique this time, because not all of them will agree to sign on to, no matter how they tried with the rewarding and form of words or on contentious issues, they simply could not find a meeting ground, so that the conference ascended today without any communique being issued. Now, this was expected because the G20 finance ministers met a while ago, and they also couldn't issue a communique. And the elephant in the room seems to be Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. Who gets the blame for the war in Ukraine? And even when you decide not to discuss the war in Ukraine by itself, but you want to discuss the situation of the global south in terms of its economy, in terms of food crisis that it faces, in terms of the health crisis it faces, you run back into who's responsible for it, with the Americans taking the position that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine that is responsible for it, while, of course, Russia that is there and China that is there take the opposite position, that you are indirectly bringing the Ukrainian conflict onto the table and blaming Russia for it. And of course, smack in the middle is Brazil, India, who don't want to be dragged into taking positions on this Russian invasion of the Ukraine. So rather than the G20 becoming, if you like, a bridge over troubled waters, in fact, the troubled waters have brought down the bridge and has prevented the G20 from taking decisions on other issues that are not germane to the Russian-Ukrainian war. And so to that extent, it has prevented India from playing the role of an interlocutor in issues all over the world. It has thought it could be a bridge between the global north and the global south. For example, food production crisis, trade relationships that which the WTO is interested in. But with India itself buying Russian oil at concessionary rates, which the Americans are opposed to, I'm afraid the G20 itself has become a victim of the Russian Ukrainian war.
Let me end with this question, sir, as we want to hear your views on the Chinese peace plan on the war in Ukraine. China came out with their, I think it was a 12-point plan on how peace could be achieved in the region. What do you think of that plan, sir?
Well, Mr. Moderator, you are the son of a reverend gentleman, just as I am the son of a reverend gentleman. And so both of us know that, yes, it is said, blessed are the peacemakers. But at the same time, when the fists are flying, you better be careful in picking the time to intervene, or else your head becomes the punching bag between the two protagonists. Good ambition for China to want to be a peacemaker. And on this program, we have called for some interlocutors to step forward with peace proposals. But when you look at the 12 points of the peace peace package put forward by the Chinese, well, one thing is missing. Not even one thing. Several things are missing. But the first one is, when you call for a ceasefire, you don't address the question of withdrawal to territories held antebellum before the war starts. You don't address that. You call for sanctions by the West to be removed. But sanctions will be removed as a result of agreements reached. Sanctions are not supposed to be removed just because there is a ceasefire. No attempt to address the substance that led to the war in the first place. So the peace proposals have been couched in such a way that on the surface, it's like a piece of banana that is so yellow outside until you peel and you discovered that inside the perfection is not as obvious as it is from the outside. And so the Russians rejected it on the grounds that it has not taken into question the fact that by referendum, they had acquired those 4 Russian-speaking territories. The Ukrainians had been clever that, well, they're studying it. They would like to meet the Chinese to discuss in further detail what the proposals are all about. The Americans said they find nothing new in it. So it's been shut down by all sides before it even left the launching pad. And what I'm not sure of is why now? Did the Chinese really think it will fly? I mean, those are 2 questions that I have raised in my mind. The third question is, why do the Chinese want to be a lone ranger? Why haven't they approached maybe France? Because France seems to be the soft partner in the NATO package, in the NATO alliance, who have said we want Russia to be defeated, but not to be crushed. In other words, Russia will not be rewarded for aggression, but it will not be disgraced. It does not lose face. Why not approach the Vatican and see to what extent can the Vatican be a partner in being interlocutors? So, as I said, I didn't give the Chinese adventure much grounds to fly. So I'm not surprised that it's been shut down.
One last question on this before we close tonight. Brazil is also putting forward a peace plan. And it seems that quite a lot of other countries are thinking about a peace plan, an approach to bring this war to an end. Is the war fatigue starting to hit these nations of the world? And if not China, Brazil?
Then who? I'm not surprised that Brazil will also leap in. Lula da Silva is an activist by nature. It's an activist that is welcome in Washington, just as he would be welcome in Moscow, and he would be welcome in Kiev. South Africa, unfortunately, had overplayed its hands in its alliance with Russia, that I doubt whether Kiev or Washington will see South Africa as an honest interlocutor. Now we are transitioning to a new regime in Nigeria, and the hope of some of us who are activists in foreign policy is that the incoming regime will be looking for opportunities to find Nigerian way back into playing an activist role in global affairs. And so to that extent, I hope that Nigeria in a way will take the position, will take the approach of Turkey, in the sense that it would engineer massive development in domestic platforms in the economy and in strategic and military production equipment and what have you. And having done that, the rest of the world will come seeking to attract Nigeria onto the world scene, rather than for Nigeria to go cap in hand to say, okay, we are back. Now, what is our role? Where is our position on the table? I think the emphasis should first be on the domestic scene, and then move from there to an activist foreign policy.
Thank you very much, sir, for tonight. Thank you to our viewers across the different platforms. We will be back with more topics next week. Once again, thank you for being here tonight. And for our viewers, please feel free in the sessions to drop your questions there. I will try my possible best to pass them across to Prof so we can hear his views on those. Thank you all for joining tonight. and see you same time next week. Good night, sir.
Wakanda forever.
Good night to viewers.
Good night.